Yeah, so usually a time where kids are really, really excited. There's often, expectations that our kids have too around, more screen time. We're so excited that we're getting gifts. We might be seeing folks we haven't seen in a while. But oftentimes these are times that might be maybe a little less exciting and just more stressful for caregivers, just given everything that you all are already juggling on top of the holidays, having to coordinate maybe travel, hosting, or going to somebody else's home. So when kids are on school vacation for the holidays, a ton of things are changing for kids. They're really losing that structure, losing that routine, which can be a really big change, especially for our kids who struggle with emotional and behavioral challenges, because we know that this downtime is oftentimes the breeding ground of some of those more challenging behaviors. And when our kids are having a hard time at home, right, that leads to just a lot more fights, whether it be with siblings, with caregivers, and just causes a lot more sort of headaches at home. And just given the amount of time that kids are out of school and now at home, we just also have just more opportunities for those fights and challenging behaviors. During this time, there's a lot more downtime, a lot less things for us to do or to accomplish. Oftentimes, extracurricular activities, music classes, all those fun outside activities are paused over the holidays. And we're also introducing more newer or less common experiences for our kids, whether that be traveling really far, getting on an airplane or a train for a long period of time, going to see, family members who maybe we see only once a year, once every couple years. Or maybe we are staying at home, but we're hosting other families. And so that comes with stress in and of itself for our caregivers, more unknowns for our kids, right? Other people are now in their space, or we might be traveling to go see family. So we are really out of our element in somebody else's environment, which we know can impact all of us. For school, when kids are on school vacations, we know that this change, this sort of disruption in routine, in structure, often increases the challenging behaviors, especially when they're not planned for or we haven't thought ahead sort of in advance. Because if kids are receiving any treatment in school, if they're meeting with their school counselor or participating in like a lunch bunch at school, all those services are not happening when kids are on school vacations. So they're losing a lot of the support and structure that are really built into their everyday lives. There's less to do. There's no homework. They're not out of the house for 6 hours a day during the school week. And so that combination can just be really tough for our kids and our families. During this time, kids tend to sort of get out of the practice, out of the habit of doing their morning routine, maybe coming home and doing homework or whatever that after school schedule might be, their bedtime routine, which can make the holiday times really tough. And also the transition back into school after the holidays really challenging if we're really not putting any structures in place and allowing our kids to sort of get out of that routine fully. It makes that transition back a lot more challenging as well. And so we know that when there is no structure, there tends to be more problematic behaviors. When I'm meeting with families right around the holidays, these are really common challenges that I hear or parents really anticipate occurring more frequently and more often during the holiday times, just given the fact that we all might be stuck at home together for a full week. And so oftentimes caregivers are saying it's much harder to get my kid to follow direction, those activities of daily living or chores that maybe they do very well outside of the school vacation, but it's school vacation, mom, why do I have to do this? This is my time to relax too. And so a lot more fights around doing those daily activities. I hear a lot of times, oh my goodness, the fights around screen time feel constant, right? My kid thinks because they're out of school that they don't have to do homework, they're not in school doing other things. Why can't I just be on the screens? I work so hard, and I'm in school all of the time. And so when we're able to sort of put structures in place, we're being a little bit more proactive about that, which can reduce the fights around screen time. Our kids tend to have more energy when all their extracurricular activities are paused, or they're maybe not going outside as frequently as they do in school, or they're able to run around during recess and get rid of all that energy in their body. A lot more power struggles with our siblings sort of stuck in the same spot. There tend to be more arguments, especially when we're not thinking ahead of planning maybe outings or downtime for our kids. So just lots of problems that arise when there's no structure in place. So now the rest of our talk, the majority of the talk today, are going to be talking about ways to get back to having a really successful holiday vacation, which includes incorporating some of that structure. We know that structure routine can be really fun, and it makes everybody's lives feel a lot easier and more enjoyable, right? Knowing that school vacations are a time when we tend to get off routine, we can really plan in advance for more structured success. We tend to have these vacation weeks like at the very beginning of the year, or even like over a year in advance. And a lot of these skills and strategies can really translate to whatever school or holiday vacation is coming up. So not just the December sort of winter vacation, but in Massachusetts, we have a whole week off in February. We also have a whole week off in April. So these skills and strategies can translate to those other times as well. Working with your kids, sort of, collaborating with them. Obviously, we want to be thoughtful about the age of your kids, but it can be really helpful to get them involved in creating the schedule and the goals over the holiday break. It's also a great skill to help kids start to learn that these structures and these routines can really help us have fun and have a more enjoyable time. When we're thinking about scheduling and creating those daily schedules or weekly schedules, we're oftentimes thinking about or the things that we want to go do, like going ice skating at Frog Pond, or going to watch the lights out at Faneuil Hall. But we're oftentimes forgetting about scheduling in that downtime or relaxing time. Right? It's really important that we're scheduling in some of that alone time that we all need to take a break from all the chaos of the holidays, having a lot of people in our space, getting really maybe overwhelmed with the amount of people in our house, the amount of people that we're seeing out at Frog Pond. And so that downtime to really relax and calm our bodies can also be so helpful in really teaching our kids ways to calm their bodies down and the importance of that before engaging in another really fun, exciting activity or outing. So when we're thinking about schedules and goals, really thinking about scheduling some of those outings, making sure we are doing some of those fun holiday, going to see the Nutcracker at the Wing Theater, going to, Frog Pond, or those fun like holiday pop-up restaurants. But we could also include things like going outside, right? We're lucky right now in Massachusetts, there's no snow on the ground, knock on wood. So kids can still go outside and maybe shoot basketball, ride their bikes outside, as well as incorporating some of that downtime. So we really want the schedule to include a variety of options that can be really helpful in structuring that success, because we know that kids really thrive in structure, predictability, and routine. It helps kids feel safe. It helps them feel prepared and know what to expect. So our 4 steps for holiday success, we're going to dive into each of these skills. But the first is sort of catching your kid being good or providing those labeled praises. We call it light switch on. And then the opposite to that is the light switch off, or using our selective attention to ignore some of the unwanted behaviors that we don't want to reinforce. rewarding or setting up some sort of rewards program for that success, and then scheduling success, which we talked a little bit about just now. So the first step is called Catch Your Kid Being Good, and it's really providing labeled praises when your kids are doing something that you want to positively reinforce and see happen again. We know that whatever happens right after a kid's behavior makes it more or less likely that that behavior is going to occur again. So when we follow a kid's behavior with the positive labeled praise, that makes it more likely that our kids are going to engage in that behavior again. When we're thinking about praise, we think about two different types of praise, unlabeled and labeled. Right? When we say things like, awesome job, or I love how you did that, right? That feels really good for our kids, right? They're like, oh my goodness, mom or dad really noticed all that really awesome thing that I did. But if your child wanted to get your positive attention again, they wouldn't really know how, because we didn't tell them exactly what we liked about their behavior, right? So when we're thinking about using effective praise, we want to make sure that it's labeled. And that means one positive and one specific, right? So telling your kid the behavior that you want to see again. Thanks so much for asking in a kind tone of voice. Right? I love that you're using polite language when talking to grandma. Right? Awesome job listening right away. Now we can, now we're going to be on time to our next outing. Right? So we tell our kids exactly what we want to see. They really know, oh, that's the behavior that my caregiver is looking for. Again, when we follow up a behavior with the labeled praise, it increases the frequency of that behavior, which just increases the amount of positive behavior that we're seeing. It's also a wonderful skill for caregivers because it really makes everybody feel good. Because when we're thinking about catching our kids being good, we're always on the lookout for all the positive things that our kids are doing, and really working to acknowledge that, like verbally or physically, like, oh, high five, I love how you, gave your grandma a hug when, she asked for one. I'm really acknowledging all of the positive behavior our kids are engaging in with our positive attention. And that makes everybody feel good. I always like to use this example of just looking at this picture, right? There are so many things that we can praise about what the kids in this picture are doing, right? I see all these kids doing a great job, walking in line, they're carrying their backpacks the right way with their two straps on their shoulders. They're following directions because I see them following the line leader over here. They're being responsible for their stuff because all of their towels, their water bottles, they're all zipped up in their backpacks. They are all facing forward when they're walking, right? So even in this picture, there's 5 or 6 things that we very quickly came up with behaviors to praise, right? But oftentimes, kids are receiving a lot more adult attention when they're engaging in the unwanted or more disruptive behavior. Because if we're maybe cooking or on the phone trying to coordinate things and our kid is maybe yelling or whining, right? That's sort of a surefire way to get our attention because it's distracting us from doing what we need to do, right? So kids are oftentimes getting way more attention for the unwanted behavior. So we really want to just actually flip that dynamic completely, right? We want to make sure we're giving our kids our full positive attention when they're engaging in the behaviors we want to see. We want to apply praise generously. There's never too much praise that we can give. Our ideal ratio of, positive praise statements to negative or neutral statements is 5 to 1. That's a really, really high ratio. And it's something that we know is really beneficial to our kids, and something that when we shift that ratio, our kids really feel that and are more motivated to get that positive attention, to change that behavior, to engage in those behaviors we know they're very capable of, but to do it on a more consistent basis. It can sometimes be really challenging to sort of in the moment think about, like, what is it that I want to praise about my kid right now? So sometimes sort of pausing when we have a little bit more downtime and proactively creating a list of positive opposite behaviors to praise can be really helpful in sort of priming us and getting us as like ready as possible to provide those labeled praise as frequently as we see that behavior. For all of us, all of our attention is, more naturally driven to those more negative behaviors. So we really want to sort of pause and say, okay, if the challenging behavior is maybe complaining or whining, what is the positive opposite of that behavior or the behavior I want to see instead? Right? And that might be using an appropriate tone of voice or asking in a kind tone of voice, right? Whatever language that is, sometimes creating a list of those prior to the holidays, even starting, can be really helpful because then, as caregivers, you're ready to praise, oh, anytime I hear that kind tone of voice or using the appropriate tone of voice. Right? We want to praise that as frequently as possible. Um, so when we're giving attention to increase the frequency of behavior, right? When we're thinking about ways to decrease the frequency of behaviors we don't want to see as often, we want to withdraw or actually reduce our attention to that behavior. And that might be something that's different than what you're doing now. And this is one of the most challenging skills for caregivers. It might sound really easy, but it's one of the toughest skills to really stick with. So I'm going to start by the coercive cycle. This is oftentimes a cycle that almost every single family can relate to at some point. But a caregiver saying, why aren't you cleaning up your toys? I told you this had to be cleaned up before grandma and grandpa come over for the holidays. It is clean. The caregiver says, what? It's still so messy in here. You need to pick up your toys. My kid said, I can't do it myself. This is so stupid. Mom says, that's no excuse. You have to clean it up right now. Kid starts crying and screaming. And mom says, fine, let's clean this up quickly, but this is the last time I'm helping you. This is an example of what we call the coercive cycle. And in this situation, right, who really wins? Does kid win? Does caregiver win? It's actually both. Both are getting something that they want out of this situation, right? For kid, they're like, oh my goodness, my caregiver helped me clean that up. Like for the caregiver, the room did get cleaned up and the kid stopped screaming and crying, right? So the parent won in that way as well. So in this situation, kid wins a little bit, caregiver wins a little bit. And this is oftentimes the cycle that we can get stuck in. So when we think about reducing the unwanted behaviors that we don't want to see, we know that when we give attention, we're increasing, we're positively reinforcing the behavior that we want to see, which is going to increase that likelihood. But when we remove our attention, when we withdraw our attention, that's when we see a reduction in that unwanted behavior. Right? Because even negative attention, even us as caregivers correcting what kids are doing, maybe yelling at our kids, telling them no, sort of participating in that coercive cycle, that could actually be reinforcing the unwanted behaviors inadvertently. Right? Because kids would rather have negative attention than no attention at all. So we know it's much more effective to actually withdraw ourselves from that coercive cycle to reduce the behavior we don't want to see anymore. Right? When we withdraw ourselves out of that coercive cycle, right? Because in the coercive cycle, mom says something, and then kid said something, and then mom gets a little louder, and then kid starts yelling, and then mom's voice raises, right? They're continuing to sort of amp each other up. When we completely withdraw ourselves from that, there's only so much that our kids are pushing up against, right? So that really reduces the frequency and the duration of the fights because we're just not responding. We're not arguing back. We're not negotiating with our kids. We're just completely removing our attention. So when we think about using our selective attention or active ignoring, it's thinking about really withdrawing our attention, our voice, our eye contact when kids are engaging in the mild attention-seeking behaviors. So these are things like complaining and whining, slamming doors, cursing, swearing, yelling, talking back, trying to negotiate, all those, again, attention-seeking and oftentimes kind of annoying behaviors, right? One of the things that we want to be clear about is that we are never ignoring aggressive or unsafe behaviors. If anything is aggressive or unsafe, that's something that we need to intervene immediately to ensure safety, because that is our number one priority, right? But for these other more attention-seeking behaviors, then we can really actively ignore or use our selective attention to reduce those power struggles. Right. So when we think about step 1 and step 2, sort of light switch on, light switch off, light switch on when kids are engaging in the behaviors we want to see, we're providing them that, labeled praise, positive attention. And then when we remove our attention, it's like a light switch off, right? If we are providing a lot of praise, kids really notice the difference when we completely withdraw our attention. And we want it to be that stark of a contrast. That's why we start with the positive praise, and then this is sort of step 2, right after we've praised a lot of the desirable behaviors that we want to see. So how do we use our selective attention? Well, first we want to identify the behaviors that we want to ignore. So this is a time when we're thinking ahead. If it's a 2-caregiver household, we are talking as both caregivers, because the more consistent that the 2 caregivers are responding, the more quickly the kid's behavior is going to change. If there are other caregivers in the home who are visiting or visiting for the holidays, you could also let them know. But again, it's really important that as caregivers, you all are on the same page about the behaviors that you are trying to ignore. So we'll use the example of a demanding tone of voice or complaining or whining. Get me that, give me the water. Again, just sort of telling in a really rude tone of voice what they want to happen. So when we're choosing that behavior to ignore, when it occurs, when our kids are using a demanding tone of voice, telling us, give me that, mom, or I want that, dad, the first thing that we do is just try to ignore, right? That means we don't want to get drawn in to arguing with them, talking with them, trying to negotiate, or tell them about why they shouldn't be using that tone of voice and why they should be using a kind tone of voice, because again, that's still giving them a ton of attention, right? When we're using our selective attention, we're not getting drawn in, we're avoiding eye contact, and we are remaining calm. We want to look as unaffected as possible. So we're not making angry facial expressions or, stomping around because we're upset, right? We're remaining calm, cool, and collected, and showing that, oh, that doesn't bother us, right? We're just waiting for that positive opposite behavior. So whatever you need to do, I've had caregivers sing songs in their heads to keep themselves distracted, play on your cell phone if that's what you need to stay distracted, get absorbed in something else. We just need you to be close enough to know when that ignorable behavior stops. Once we see the ignorable behavior stop, right? Our kids stop engaging in that demanding tone of voice. Give me that, mom, why aren't you listening to me? Why are you ignoring me? I said I need a glass of water. You're not taking care of me, right? As soon as that behavior stops, whether it's kids taking a deep breath because they might be about to keep demanding things, or they stop because they realize, oh, that's not the way to get my caregiver's attention. That is when we are returning our full attention to our kid and praising the positive opposite behavior. Thank you so much for asking in a kind tone of voice. Right now, I'm ready to answer your question. That is the key part of active ignoring or selective attention. That is the corrective sort of piece, is us providing that labeled praise, telling our kids the right way to get caregiver attention. Right? If we don't praise that positive opposite, our kids might not even know what we're looking for, or they just feel like we are ignoring them. Right? So we really have to, we call it closing the loop on active ignoring by praising the positive opposite behavior as soon as it happens, right? Sometimes when we say, oh, thanks so much for using a kind tone of voice, right? They might go right back into the demanding tone of voice. Well, give me that. I said I wanted a glass of water, right? Light switch off, right? We go and do something else. We turn our bodies, we, get on our cell phones, we're texting, we're doing whatever, right? As soon as they stop that demanding tone of voice, thank you so much for having that kind tone of voice. Right? That's why we use that metaphor, light switch on, light switch off, because it can happen sort of that quickly. And we want it to be that stark of a contrast for our kids. This is really where they learn the more appropriate way to get caregiver attention. Right? Active ignoring really helps teach kids the right way to get caregiver attention, because they learn that, their questions don't get answered, their needs don't get met when they are complaining, whining, yelling, demanding, using a demanding or commanding tone of voice. Right? So there's a lot of learning that goes on in active ignoring. One of the things we always like to prep caregivers on is what we call an extinction burst. And I like to use the example of like an elevator. If we go to work and every single day when we, hit that button to go upstairs, right? We hit the button, the door opens, we get in the elevator, I go to the fourth floor, I go to my office, right? It's the same thing every single day. But one day, right, I click the elevator button, nothing happens. The door doesn't open right away, right? What do we tend to do when that happens? We say click, 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 right? We keep on clicking that button until the door opens, right? Because what we expected to happen didn't happen, right? And that's called an extinction burst. And that's what we expect from our kids when we put a new behavior on ignore. Because we as caregivers and adults are changing our response. So we can reasonably expect our kids to test those limits, right? To go maybe bigger, harder, longer, louder, to see, am I going to get my caregiver attention that way? Right. So that's why this sort of third bullet is saying stick with ignoring, even if it temporarily amps up. Because once that happens, we say stick with it. That's when we see a quick reduction in that behavior, because the kid is learning that is not the right way to get my caregiver's attention. Right. So that temporary increase in the behavior is a good sign. That means your kids are noticing that you're doing something different. So just stick with it. And then we see the reduction in behavior. That's where a lot of the learning happens. Right? The extinction bursts don't happen for every single kid, but it's something that we can reasonably expect. So that is selective attention. Step 3 are rewards. Rewards are really powerful reinforcers. And we know that some kids are less motivated by the non-tangible reinforcers than other kids. And so reward systems can be extremely beneficial in making the expectations for kids and for caregivers very clear. When we make those expectations really clear about this is how you earn screen time, this is when you know that you've accomplished your goals for the day, that can oftentimes really reduce some of the fights around maybe screen time, getting those daily activities completed, because it's listed there and everybody knows what those expectations are. It also helps caregivers pay attention to the more appropriate behaviors like brushing your teeth or doing morning or bedtime routines. These reward systems can be a really great way to teach kids work ethic. Because oftentimes when we're creating these reward systems, we're basically teaching kids that the harder that you work at things, the more responsibilities you complete, right? The more rewards that you get, which is true even for us as adults. And so it's a great sort of skill and work ethic to teach our kids. When we implement effective reward strategies, because we know there's like a million ways to implement rewards charts, but when we do it in a really effective way, it can really help kids sort of follow the rules because they know what they're expected to do. It can help increase independence because they will get rewarded more for doing things independently versus with caregiver reminders. It can increase their ability to follow directions because they know exactly what they're expected to do, and really increase that self-responsibility. Because again, they can go and reference the rewards chart. They know exactly what they're expected to do and can go do that more independently. And that can really boost kids' self-confidence, their self-competence, and self-efficacy in completing different tasks. Uh, there's a lot of different types of reward systems. Grandma's law, we call this the sort of like one-to-one single behavior if then rewards charts. So it's called Grandma's law because it's very much like if you eat your vegetables, then you get dessert. But we can use that with any sort of behavior. If you engage in, if you complete your morning routine, then you can watch an episode of Bluey. Right? We just want to make sure that in any of these reward systems, reward charts that we are doing, that we want to make sure that the desired behavior or the behavior that we're expecting our kids to engage in happens before the reward happens. Otherwise, that's a bribe. Oh, here is an example of a rewards chart for a younger kid. And again, the chores or responsibilities are going to be different based on the age of your kid, based on where your kid is developmentally. And so we want to make sure that the things we're putting on the rewards chart are things that our kids are capable of doing. Right. So this is an example of a rewards chart for a younger child. And here is a rewards chart for an older child. And this is an example of ways that we can really leverage the rewards chart and the point values to motivate kids to do things more independently, right? You can see on this chart that all the behaviors that say independently are worth more than the with reminders for caregivers. Right. So these are ways that we can really motivate kids to do things that we know they're capable of more independently, knowing that, 4 points might equal a certain amount of screen time. Another sort of key piece of the rewards chart and ways that as caregivers you can sort of flex the amount of points that our kids have is through those bonus points. So you can see there's a bonus point category in all the rewards charts, and that's for the more sort of intermittent reinforcement. So things that are more difficult to track on a daily basis. So for example, using language like please and thank you, right? It'd be really, really hard to track that every single time our kid does that. So that might be a time where when we notice it, we're giving bonus points. Oh my gosh, 3 bonus points for using please and thank you. I love when you're using such kind words. Okay. Versus brushing teeth in the morning and the evening, that's pretty clear. You either did it or you didn't do it, right? But for those more sort of frequency behaviors, that's a great way to reinforce those is by using bonus points. Some misconceptions about rewards is giving rewards bribing my child. The answer is no, right? The big difference between a bribe and a reward is that a bribe comes before the behavior happens, right? I'll let you use screen time if you promise to brush your teeth when I tell you to in 10 minutes. Or, I'll get you that ice cream if you promise to clean up your room when we get home. That's a bribe. A reward is making things contingent on specific behavior. And we use the metaphor for caregivers that rewards are like paychecks, right? They're not for those extraordinary sort of behaviors, but it's like for us. If we didn't get paid for just going to work, I wonder how many of us would continue to sort of show up for our 9 to 5s if we're not given that paycheck unless we do something extraordinary, right? So these rewards are really like a paycheck for our kids doing the things that we expect them to do, like their, activities of daily living in the morning, getting dressed, eating breakfast, brushing their teeth. When we put these rewards in place, we are teaching our kids that nothing is free, right? So all their rewards are now contingent on their behavior. But the benefit to that is that oftentimes with our rewards chart, if kids are doing things independently and doing or completing their responsibilities on a consistent basis, they're oftentimes getting more rewards or maybe more screen time or whatever it is that they're motivated by than they were getting originally, right? Again, really teaching them that work ethic. The harder you work, the more that you get. Something that I hear often is, well, my kids should be doing these things, but they shouldn't need a reward to do it. My question back is, okay, and are they? Right? Sometimes our kids really need that external motivation to do those things more consistently. Right? Our kids are very capable of doing the X, Y, or Z thing, sort of behaviors that we put on the rewards chart. The harder the challenge is doing it maybe without pushback or doing it more independently. When we stick those behaviors on the rewards chart, it sort of takes away the fight around those uh, um, around those behaviors and incentivizes them to do it more consistently. As kids do things more consistently because they're motivated by the rewards, they learn that, oh, it's actually really easy to brush my teeth and it really only takes 2 minutes. And my toothbrush turns off and tells me when that 2 minutes is done. Right. So sometimes what the reward chart can be so beneficial with is just helping kids get into that routine of doing it so frequently that they realize, oh, that's no big deal. And I'm getting a bunch of screen time for doing those responsibilities that my caregivers picked for me. One of the other sort of challenges or, sort of pushbacks around reward charts is that they're really complicated and time consuming. And yes, they certainly can be. And we're always sort of starting with like a maximum of like 3 behaviors on the rewards chart, right? Because we want to make it as consistent and sustainable as possible, but it's going to take more time, more effort up front, just like any new thing will. But once we really get into the groove of the rewards chart, it can be so helpful in the long run. Because once we have an established rewards chart with rewards that kids are motivated by, that rewards chart can really be used anywhere, right? It's immediate. It really retains its value, whether we're, at school, over holiday vacation, going to the theater to watch the Nutcracker. So there are ways that we can sort of utilize that rewards chart no matter where we go once we have it implemented. We want to make sure that we are matching the rewards to our child's development, and we need a lot of buy-in from our kids. So that means we are actually talking to our kids and asking them, what are the small, medium, and big rewards or daily, weekly, or the bigger rewards that you want to earn? Right, for doing all the things that a lot of what you're already doing. And that's sort of the way that we're introducing it to kids is saying, you are doing all these awesome things. I love how you get dressed all by yourself already. You brush your teeth and you calm down, ready for school, ready for the day. I want to make sure that I'm recognizing all of that and that you're getting rewarded for all the awesome things that you're doing. What are some of the rewards that you want to earn? If kids are not motivated by the things on the rewards chart, our rewards chart's not going to work. Right. So we really, again, need their buy-in, need their collaboration in thinking about those rewards menu items. One thing that we're never telling kids is that our rewards charts are static or staying the way that they are, because they're not. Our rewards charts are always changing as kids master the skills on the rewards chart. Maybe we're putting something that's a little bit too challenging on there, so we got to take it and make it maybe slightly easier to meet them where they are. And so it's really like an iterative process around how we're constantly changing point values, the behaviors on the rewards chart. We try to think of like the Goldilocks sort of porridge of, of rewards charts here. And then the last step for successful holidays is really scheduling for success, just like we talked about in the beginning, really involving your kid in the schedule. Maybe there are a few sort of big activities that you all have as a family have planned. So it can be helpful to sort of plan maybe around those times, really get them involved and teach them the skill of scheduling, because it can be helpful. It's something that we as adults need, just in our lives in general. And it really gives kids sort of ownership of part of their vacation, part of their schedule. Right. So we're not just going to follow if kids are like, I want 6 hours of screen time today. We're not going to be like, okay, nice job making a schedule. Right. So this is where we're going to sort of collaborate with them, maybe adjust some of those the pieces of the schedule that we need to. We're going to offer different options for activities. Maybe we have one outdoor thing that we're doing every day. Or if your kids are really artistic and they love to, I don't know, build pretty schedules, that could be a fun sort of art activity to do together. It could also be a great way to sort of show maybe other family members when they come over, like, oh my goodness, look at the schedule that my kid and I made together. Isn't that so cool? They did such a good job, thinking about what grandma and grandpa can do. So our outside activity today is going to go, walk our dog around the block. So coming up with schedules can be really fun. But again, remembering to schedule a variety of different activities, including that downtime, relaxing time. It can include screen time, right? We want to include a bunch of different activities. Making a plan. So this is an awesome skill for really any tricky situation that might be coming up, whether that's, hosting family for the holidays, going to the grocery store, whether it's holiday vacation or not, going to the theater where there's going to be a bunch of kids, or going to the zoo when it's really hard maybe to keep our bodies calm and stay with our family. And so again, making a plan is really helping caregivers thinking ahead of those challenging times. And so really thinking about, if like grocery shopping, for example, if we're taking our kid to the grocery store for the big grocery shop, that's not really fun or interesting for our kid. And again, when kids are bored, that's when we see more problematic behaviors. So really making sure that wherever you're going, that there's something for your kid to do. So if it's at the grocery store, maybe they, have a list of, I don't know, 5 or 6 things, and every aisle there's something that they're helping you look for. Or some sort of activity, I Spy, that you're playing as you're walking down the grocery aisle. We want to be thoughtful about the time and the sort of space that our kids are in when we're going to those outings. So if we're going to a place that maybe it's like church or temple or something where our kid typically struggles in, right? Going at night when they're hungry and really tired might not be the best idea, right? We're not really setting ourselves or our kid up for success in that way. And when we're thinking ahead of whatever activity, whatever situation that we're going through, we really want to think in advance of, 2 to 3, no more than 3 sort of rules that we want our kid to follow, to be able to repeat back to us, and then setting up rewards and consequences based on if our kids followed those directions. And so we want caregivers to really think ahead of time, like before we even leave the house. So we're able to talk to our kid about, hey, we are going to, the grocery store today to pick up some things before we go to, Aunt's house for the holidays. Right. The 2 rules that we have are 1 hand on the cart and listening to caregivers. That might be just the 2 rules that we need for the grocery store. Maybe we're saying, kid, if you are able to follow those two rules while we're in the grocery store today, right, then you can get a piece of chocolate on the way at the checkout counter, right? But if you're not able to follow the rules, then we're not able to earn that chocolate or that candy at the checkout cashier or whatever. So when we're setting those rules, we're, reminding kids before we leave the house, in the car, like right before they walk into the store, having them repeat back those 2 rules to you. And then we are really front loading our labeled praises when we see kids engaging in those behaviors. Awesome job keeping your hand on the cart. You are on your way to earning that candy at the checkout. Right. I love how I almost saw you like go and grab something, but you remembered to keep your hand on the cart. Awesome job remembering those rules. You're on your way to earning that candy at the checkout line. Right. So in those labeled praises, you're reminding the kids of what those rules are as well as the reward that they are earning. And this really works for any outing, any activity that families are doing. Discipline and consequences. We spend most of our time talking about praise and attention to the positive opposite behaviors because we know that is the single most effective behavior management tool that we have. And we know that that doesn't capture sort of all behaviors that we might see over the holidays. We want you all to really think about the consequences that you're providing your kid over the holidays, making sure that it's sort of equal to the problematic behavior that your kid engaged in and their developmental stage. We want to make sure that whatever the consequence is, that is consistent and predictable, right? That is the most important thing because oftentimes, caregivers are saying, I didn't even know what to take away at a certain, I just said, you lost screen time for the rest of the week. When that might just not be possible if we have a week off of school, right? There might be times when we need our kid to be on that iPad for us to maybe get things done. And so we don't want to make promises or punishments that we can't keep. So thinking ahead about what are those consistent, predictable consequences can be really beneficial for you as well as for your kid because they know exactly what to expect when they hit their brother or they're not listening or they didn't brush their teeth that morning. And just making sure that with whatever reward and consequence that you all are putting in place, that you're able to follow through. Right? We never want to make promises that we can't keep or, give consequences that we can't follow through with because then our kids are like, oh, caregivers' words maybe don't mean as much because last time they said I lost screen time for the whole week, but I still got it for like a couple hours that day. And so again, that follow through is really important. And sort of the theme, I think, for the holiday vacation is just, spending some time thinking ahead of those challenging behaviors and ways to reward and provide consistent consequences for those behaviors. This last slide is just a summary of the skills. So really, focusing on providing those labeled praises as often as possible. We can never praise too much. And so really providing those labeled praises for the behaviors you want to see, withdrawing your attention for those more unwanted, undesirable behaviors, but then closing that loop by praising the positive opposite as soon as you see that behavior. Maybe coming up with a rewards chart for the holidays or even using just if-then contingencies on a pretty daily basis can be really helpful, making those expectations clear. And then scheduling for success, really scheduling a variety of different activities, pairing the less preferred activities with highly desirable ones, right? That grandma's law that we were talking about. If you, do this behavior that you maybe don't want to do as much, then you get rewarded by getting to go to the arcade with your cousins. So that's really the summary of the skills. And now I will leave a few minutes, I guess, for questions, if anybody has any questions for me. Right, love that. Means I was super clear with all of my all of my skill descriptions. There is a blog post that Caroline McDonald wrote on this topic as well online that sort of outlines a lot of the skills that we talked about here for your reference on the website. But if there are no questions, I hope everybody has a happy new year and a successful holiday vacation week.